Hello everyone and welcome back to Future Now, a joint collaboration between AdNews and Facebook. My name is Asya Ben-Majdoub. I'm the publisher of AdNews and your host for the series. In the first episode, we took a macro view of the world, looking at how people and the economy have changed in 2020. In this episode, we're going to deep dive into Adland and all things creative, with a debate around head versus heart. Have the marketing fundamentals changed this year? And what is the role of science and creativity in marketing plans moving forward? We have an incredible panel lineup for you today, spanning from Australia, San Francisco, and Auckland. They're about to introduce themselves, starting with you, Fatima.
Hi, Asya, and hi, everyone. I'm Fatima Saliu, and I'm the head of international marketing at Facebook. In my capacity here at Facebook, I'm responsible for ensuring our wonderful portfolio of brands, from Instagram and Facebook to WhatsApp and Messenger, and even our corporate brand, are trusted and valued and locally relevant to the billions of people who use our products around the world. So I'm delighted to be here. Prior to Facebook, I held marketing leadership positions at J&J, Coca-Cola, and Disney, and looking forward to getting into today's conversation.
Fantastic. And Byron, I might throw over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Byron Sharp. I'm a professor of marketing science at the University of South Australia, and I have the pleasure of directing the Irumbu Bass Institute. Institute's owl behind me.
Fantastic. And what about you, Damon?
Hello, everybody. My name's Damon Stapleton. I'm Regional Chief Creative Officer for DDB across New Zealand and Australia. And I oversee brands from banking to FMCG to everything else in between. It's really good to be here.
Great stuff. Fatima, what have we learned in 2020 and have the marketing fundamentals changed?
What have we not learned? What a year it's been. I'll say this, having spent the majority of my career in FMCG, I've come to appreciate the speed at which things move in tech. But this last 6 months has taught us that, that speed wasn't even enough. We need to move faster and we need to become more agile. So I would say the number one learning has been how to become more agile in this environment. For us personally, it's meant really adapting to the ways in which the millions of people who newly come onto our platform or have engaged more in our platform since the pandemic are seeking to connect with one another, get information, and adapt to a new way of living. Beyond that, I think the other big learning is that brands no longer have the ability to not engage and not communicate with consumers, especially as it relates to issues in the social, political climate that affect them every day.
Byron, what have you seen in 2020?
Look, I mean, the Institute's sponsored by big consumer brands like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and Unilever and so, they look to us for the evidence because there's all people shouting around them. These are unprecedented times and everything's changing. And they want to know, is consumer behavior really changing radically? And the answer is no. I mean, there's obvious things like there's more people at home. They're spending more time on TV and Facebook and things. But no, the fundamentals haven't. The remarkable thing is they haven't changed that much.
And what do you see as the key fundamentals?
Oh, a few times was like consumers are busy with their lives. They don't care about brands very much. They're naturally loyal because they use shortcuts. They shop very quickly. The marketing battle is won largely for attention. All of these things have stayed the same.
Damon, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, I'm in the unique position of having gone into lockdown and come out of lockdown in New Zealand. And I think what we saw initially was a sort of scrambling of short-term messaging, talking about helping, being there. And there were a lot of brands that did that initially. But when we came out of lockdown and we went back to normal, we started to see advertising going back to normal and sort of going back to the way it was. So, there's definitely learnings about being agile and being faster and being able to respond. But I think generally, once the world settled down, so did marketing and advertising.
Byron, there's some research that's come out that showed that 41% of Australians have tried a new brand in the past 3 months. What do you think this means for brand loyalty at this time?
Love that. It's worth something like 41%. If they'd said 40, it wouldn't have sounded so
40.5%.
I mean, obviously, in some areas there were stockouts and things, so that forces people to maybe try a new brand. But there's a certain proportion of people who try new brands always. It doesn't necessarily shake up the world very much, particularly if you buy a new brand and you don't see reinforcing advertising, because you very quickly forget what that new brand was. We forget an enormous part of advertising is to remind people of what they actually did before. I think most of us have had the example where we've gone to a new restaurant sometime, thought it was great, said we must come back here, and then we never did because we can't remember the name of the place. And in fact, I can't even remember where it was in town. And, you know, this is the really important thing of advertising, to remind us, to help us be brand loyal. So that 41% of consumers have tried a new brand out of the hundreds. It doesn't scare me, no. I would still, you know, hold on to your shares in Procter & Gamble. You'll be okay.
Damon, has it changed from a creative perspective?
I think there's been some changes, and a lot of that was to do with the making of work and production. That was a big difference in terms of how you actually, you know, how do you make a piece of film or content if you've got social distancing? Or, you know, there were all sorts of learnings there from the making. And then I think the other change for me was, initially there was a sort of I would call it a worthiness from brands, you know, all being very serious and being very heartfelt and very caring. But what I noticed, and I actually picked this up with consumers before I saw it with brands, is consumers wanted to laugh. And there's all sorts of examples that I've seen of what consumers have done to get through COVID. And I feel like later on brands started to move back to humor and back to emotion, as opposed to just being sort of worthy. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but that's how it felt.
Consumers always like to laugh.
Yeah. I know it's like this weird discovery that people like to laugh in advertising, but I've been doing it a long time, and it seems something we discover every year.
Damon, what are some of the ways that creative agencies have overcome the challenge of social distancing and filming and creating works at this time? Yeah,
I mean, we've had to become incredibly flexible, as have production companies. So obviously a lot of the tools of the trade, you start to look at things like animation. You start to look at how you're going to make an ad. You know, and a lot of the way that we write ads, or in that 3-month period, was based on restrictions. But, you know, the great thing about creativity is it's designed to get around the matrix. So, you know, I think creativity really showed its worth during COVID, because it found ways around problems. Having said that, I think there's a huge amount of work that was incredibly generic and, dare I say it, shit. Because it was all the same. And I think a lot of that was because people had a sort of knee-jerk reaction, and they all said the same things. So maybe the greatest learning out of this for me as a creative is try not to say what everyone else is saying, or say it in a better way.
Can you think of any examples of something creative that's really impressed you during this lockdown period in terms of advertising and that creative skill?
It's easier for me to think of examples of things that didn't impress me.
Right.
I actually think the thing that was the most interesting was maybe in how some brands behaved, and, you know, how they did things differently, or were able to pivot, and I guess that's a marketing word, pivot, their business. I found that more incredible. You know, we look at, say, a brand like McDonald's here, being able to, you know, figure out what it was going to do with the restrictions it had. I found that really impressive, how quickly some of the brands were able to move.
Fatima, what's your take on all of this? Have the marketing laws changed?
Well, fortunately, we're early in our brand building journey, and that journey is from evolving our products to you know, these amazing ubiquitous products, to brands that actually have meaning, that are loved and trusted and valued by our consumers. And our approach to this is really ultimately to build brands that stand the test of time, Now, brands that stand the test of time have five things in common, excuse me. They're rooted in purpose. They play a meaningful role in people's lives. They build strong emotional connections. They behave with integrity, and they constantly reinvent themselves. And so for us, while the world may change, our approach to building our brands have not. Also key to that approach is really thinking across channels. And so it's intuitive to think that, you know, building Facebook brands only happen on Facebook. And certainly our campaigns lead with our own platform. So our creative on platform is often, you know, the first lever we pull when bringing a brand to life. But we've also complemented that with other channels, including TV and other digital channels, and out of home, again, as people go out into the world. And so as we have done, we also have seen many of our other partners begin to build their brands on platform. And we think this is smart because people are increasingly going to be transacting and engaging online as a result of the pandemic and our new world.
Damon, what makes for an effective creative campaign now, and what evidence is there to support this?
Oh, well, I'm no scientist, but I think you've got you got Professor Byron Sharp, you've got Les Binet, you've got Daniel Kahneman. I mean, I think, you know, there's probably a lot of evidence that what makes effective advertising is there's some sort of emotional component. And I think it's interesting because we're having these discussions about, you know, should we be doing TV or should we be doing digital? Or, you know, there's a lot of conversations at the moment about the picture frame rather than the picture. And I think, you know, the rules for effective advertising is that it reaches the consumer and it makes them notice. And often the shortest way to do that is making them feel something, because that's probably the shortest way to getting them to act. So, you know, I think we get lost in channels a lot, but I think that rule is pretty consistent across digital, film, content, you know, whatever you like. So for me, it's like, did it make me feel something, and did I remember something? And I'm sure those two things are linked. But that for me is what an effective campaign is, and it doesn't matter what the channel.
You mentioned McDonald's as a really successful pivot earlier. What was it about the campaign? What was it about the creative that you thought was so effective?
Oh, well, we did I mean, it sounds like a really small thing, but we did a thing where we brought back the Big Mac after it had been away, which I can tell you was quite traumatic for some people. There were literally people lined up down the road, and we used the song Return of the Mac. Yes, I know, it's genius. But it was just the fact that we were able to make that really quickly. We were able to make people smile, and we didn't deviate from the brand. And I think the thing is, for me, is brands shouldn't really change in a time of crisis. They should almost use their brand in the time of crisis to say what they've always said. So, you know, I thought it's a small example for me, but there was a consistency with what we did, that we used the situation to our advantage.
Was the Big Mac gone in New Zealand?
Well, McDonald's was shut down. We're in level 4 lockdown.
Yeah.
So you can imagine there were some people that were looking forward to a Big Mac.
Byron, you're an evidence-based man. What makes a creative campaign successful now, and what evidence is there to support that?
Okay, well, if anyone tells you that there's a recipe for making great creative, there isn't.
Yes, please don't.
There isn't. But and we've done a lot of research looking to see if there is. And no, I mean, advertising's complicated, but we know what it has to do. It has to refresh memory structures, and occasionally build new memory structures that help people notice a brand and buy it. So getting an emotional reaction may be one way to do that quickly. It's not the only way, but you know, we must reach and we must build memories for our brand. So advertising has to get noticed. We have to realize, but we have to realize it's advertising. I mean, we have to know, and you know, the great thing is about that that burger chain with a Scottish name is that it has wonderful distinctive assets, and so, you know, if we use those in advertising is more likely to work.
Can you think of any creative campaigns that that come to mind during this lockdown period that really stand out for you?
I'm going to say something that you're going to really hate.
Oh, go on.
One of the things that I remember is that Coca-Cola was brave enough to say, we're going to stop advertising, because they realized everyone was talking about the coronavirus. And you know, when you're basically losing share of voice just so dramatically, you know, you can stop for a while, and that was okay. And you know, and then come back with some great creative once people are sick of reading stories about coronavirus. But the people who made the mistake of going, oh, everyone's talking about the coronavirus, will go out and talk about it as well, just got, I think, lost in all the noise.
So we've heard staying silent is an effective strategy at this time. Also pivoting and bringing back old memories of things like McDonald's and the Big Mac. Fatima, what are your thoughts around this area?
Well, for us, you know, people were online, and in some cases they were seeking information. In some cases there was doom scrolling, but in most cases they were seeking connection and an entertainment. And so I was delighted with the ways in which we were able to, you know, first, you know, size up the moment and provide a resource. Our Never Lost campaign, which was our first response to the pandemic, was as much about you know, inspiring an emotional response from people as it was directing them to a resource that turns out, you know, many really valued to support them during this unprecedented time. Over time, in many of our markets, our creatives met people where they were. And so, as was noted earlier, in some cases there was trepidation, some cases there was a bit of fear, but in many cases people were adapting to life indoors. So whether it was Brazilians doing the samba indoors, or parents in the UK figuring out how to keep their kids entertained, or even Germans still, you know, celebrating football when they couldn't go and view the games outdoors, our creatives reflected their real experience and their real emotion. And that was something that, you know, we found got people from just passively engaging on social media to really forming connections within groups and other forums on our platforms.
Australian shoppers are experimenting with new ways to shop, with 29% of consumers completing a transaction through a messaging service. What's your take on that?
Well, people have come online not just for connection or seeking information. We've seen on our platforms that they're now transacting, and e-commerce has become bigger and bigger than ever. So for example, in Australia, we've seen CPG brands shift from just providing recipes and food ingredients to providing like fine dining experiences. And on the flip side, we've seen consumers, those of whom have used a meal delivery service in the past 4 weeks, 62% of them have been new. And most of that, of course, is driven by Gen Z. But again, that's a new behavior that we hadn't historically seen on the platform prior to our new world.
Byron, what's your take on that?
We were actually amazed at how shopping behavior, because we knew that people spent more in supermarkets, and we knew that people were stocking out of things like toilet paper and things. And so you get all these stories of massive stocking up, which we know is actually counter to one of the main patterns of shopping behavior in supermarkets, and that people use supermarkets as a pantry. They don't stock up hugely. They keep going back. Half of all supermarket shops, people are buying 6 items or less. That's the normal behavior. So we looked at it during the pandemic, and it was pretty much the same. By far, the bulk of shops were still people popping in to get 1 or 2 items. There's a few people doing some big shops, but there always are. So even in the super, stock up times, people's behavior was remarkably similar to what it is in usual times. People have lives and they don't like deviating from them dramatically.
What other interesting research points have you guys found during this time?
Well, I've got a little one I'll throw in. I found it yesterday, actually, because I knew we were getting a question about e-commerce. And I found there's a story about Kanye West, his platform, which is obviously all about e-commerce, he's trying to make it a lot more emotional. And I think this is an interesting point about e-commerce. E-commerce might be how you get something, and it might be how you obtain a product, but I'm not 100% sure yet it builds a brand. You know, and I think that's sort of it's an interesting fork in the road, because at the moment it's quite a functional process, and I think there's quite a lot of work to be done on how you can make e-commerce a more experiential and more emotional space, because I think at the moment it isn't. But I saw that yesterday, and I thought it was interesting that they were trying to do that. And maybe that's a hint as to where that's going to go in the future.
That leads us nicely to the next question, which is, what does the future look like for marketing? We've talked about the shifts that have already happened this year. Byron, where do you see it going into 2021?
Into economic recession. I think that's...
Yay!
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you know that we do have business downturns. But you know, the good news, I mean, for people who are doing basic consumer products, there isn't, you know, I would say don't panic. I mean, we studied the last recession, and for supermarket products, it's remarkable. There really is no downshifting to cheaper products, you know, no more than normal. So, you know, people spoil themselves. I mean, some people try to save in some areas, but in other things they spoil themselves. What we do know is that, well, you know, I wouldn't like to own shares in cruise ships or airlines or any of the big ticket items. We know that they suffer. Champagne sales, we know, suffer during recessions. You know, certainly in lockdowns there are fewer weddings and things. But apart from those obvious things, another remarkable thing for people selling consumer goods is don't panic, don't slash the price of your product, don't feel you need to completely throw out your previous advertising campaign, and no. Keep calm and carry on.
And how can these fast-moving consumer brands stand out? Is there something they can do to incite people to shop more or to engage with their brand?
No, what they need to do is learn how to be decent brand managers, which means measuring their distinctive assets. I remember, I mean, 99% of the brands in the world have still not even measured their distinctive assets. So you've got people with the title of brand manager who don't actually know what in people's heads does the branding. Yeah, that really is an indictment on our discipline, I think. The discipline without discipline.
Where do they start if they want to take that journey? And they should take that journey.
Well, they could start by reading Jenny Romanik's book on managing distinctive assets. And then they should measure their distinctive assets, and then they should build in a really rigorous thing of making sure they use them in every single media that they use. It's why I have the Ehrenberg Bass Owl behind me now, trying to practice what we preach.
Very good. Are there any other brands that are doing it well at the moment?
Oh, the great brands of the world have had wonderful, you know, we've been talking about McDonald's. I mean, what wonderful distinctive assets, you know, the golden arches, Ronald McDonald, the color scheme that they mostly keep to. Occasionally someone tries to sabotage it, but you know, that is great use of distinctive assets, because otherwise, let's be honest, McDonald's is an American burger chain where they sell burgers and shakes and soft drinks and
and a Big Mac. Damon, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think keep calm and carry on is a well-tested phrase. And I think there's been sort of maybe a little bit of panic. And I do sometimes think we marketing advertising people are in an echo chamber. So if one person does it, everybody does it, and it sort of builds. I think the fundamentals of why people are interested in certain brands probably haven't really changed that much. The one thing I do find interesting is this sort of idea of digital. You know, digital is telephone. You know, it's not a conversation. And I think, you know, I think in the future, especially with brands, you know, are you going to ask for Nike, or are you going to just search for shoes? I think that becomes a really interesting question about how brands perform in a digital space. And I think a lot of that is to do with people knowing what they want before they even go online. And that means that where you build your brand might not necessarily be where it's available, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's just like when we used to realize we couldn't build our brands just inside the stores.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, we talk about e-commerce and you talk about retail with house brands. That there isn't actually a massive difference in those two experiences in terms of where you obtain stuff, but where the brand is built. And I do think there's a lot of conversations where people think sales equals brand building, but that's probably a conversation for another day.
Fatima, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the world normalizes a little bit, the one thing I'm betting on is that the behavior that we've seen with more and more people spending time and transacting online and businesses becoming more digital friendly, that will continue. It's not an or, but it is an and. And the need for brands to not just show up, to your point, but to think about how to effectively build their brands across a variety of channels is going to be critical. For us with our campaigns, while we've often been, we've led with our own platform, we've had complementary channels because we know there's still a role for TV, there's still a role for other digital, and eventually as more and more people are back in the world, out of home will become important again. And so the need to be thoughtful about where you show up and how your brand stands out is going to remain a trend that I see continuing personally. I'll also just add, like, behavior like shopping, you know, on Instagram is becoming so normalized in so many places. And so I just think that how and where they seek to not just get informed, but to actually take that action is also going to increasingly be on some of these digital and social platforms.
And Fatima, as more people shop online, where do you see the role of things like voice assistants moving forward?
Oh, wow. You know, I don't think there's, who was it? I think it was Byron that said earlier, people are busy, you know, so technology will continue to be an enabler, cut through the clutter, cut down time, and they'll play a bigger role in helping them to make their lives easier. But the whole point of voice assistants is you have to know what you want to ask for. And so if your brand is not top of mind, then, you know, what you're going to get is only going to be as good as what you put into it. But I do see voice assistants playing a big role, all types of technologies playing a big role, social playing a big role in consumption moving forward.
Byron and Damon, what are your takes on that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Fatima, is that obviously voice and those things are going to become bigger. But, you know, if you don't know the brand that you're looking for, let's say you just ask for batteries, you know, there is a danger that one day there might only be one brand of battery. I think it can go both ways. How you build a brand in the future means you need to know what you want, as opposed to just talking about, generic products. So I'm interested in voice, but I think brand becomes your navigation device maybe in the future. It tells you what you need to go and do. I don't know if this is going to make much sense, but the thing about algorithms is they give you more of what you're looking for. I always think that you build brands by finding what you're not looking for. So maybe that's my sort of thinking about brand building going forward. I think that you build a brand by appealing to as many people as possible. And I think sometimes algorithms do the opposite of that.
Byron, evidence man, what's your take?
Yeah, well, I'll reinforce, you do build a brand by appealing to as many people as possible. And so if more people are shopping online, if that's a growing channel, then like in the same way that, Aldi and things are growing channels, you need to be in there. Although, it depends on your category, but I warn against this sort of fashion, crunch the numbers and see where your consumers go and what for your category, where stuff sells. I'm seeing some brands like fashion brands in Australia, particularly ones coming out of Melbourne now. They're probably in survival mode, so that basically they're just shutting their stores, right? And it's going, well, our online's growing, so we'll just get out of bricks and mortar entirely. And that is not a way to build a big brand, because they're going to get, as people come out of lockdown and start moving out of their houses, they're going to be thumped by the brands that do have the bricks and mortar still. So it's not the idea of going completely digital. That's fine if you're Google selling search advertising, if you're an online, but if you're selling clothes, bricks and mortar is still huge. So you got to know all your channels.
And you've got to bring back the experience, like you said, post-lockdown. Damon, a good example of that is Tiny Pub. Talk us through it.
The reason we like Tiny Pub is it was based on this idea of, Emerson's is a craft beer company in New Zealand, and puts a lot of care into how it makes its beer. And we said, well, what if we made a pub for that? And this sort of coincided with COVID-19 and social distancing. So we said, what would happen if we made a pub for only 2 people? Because that's actually the best way to enjoy a beer, with your best friend, and you had the whole pub to yourself. So that's what we did. We created a pub that had 2 people and a bartender, and we took it all over New Zealand. And we let people, you could book 27-minute slots, because we reckon that's about the right time to drink a beer. And it was really, really successful. And I think what it also proves is, if you have an idea that is based on, it's based on the brand, and it's something that's interesting to people, you could put that on TV, you could put that on Facebook, you could put it across all sorts of digital channels, but it's something that people find interesting. So I guess I'm becoming more interested in the content that I'm making, sometimes more than sort of where it is. Because I think if you get the idea right, then people will find it.
What a fantastic note to end on. It's all about experiences, all about triggering an emotional reaction in what has been a very, very unprecedented year, pardon the overuse of that word. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. Make sure you take our survey on the Ad News page, and we'll see you for the next episode of Future Now.